Hello and welcome to the Fun Police Podcast. This is Josh Grody.
And this is Devon Payne.
And this is episode 4. And today we're going to be talking about the importance of music in video games and cinema to create ambiance and drive emotional responses. So, is there any better feeling than going to a movie and you get hit with that intro music? Think Star Wars. Think The Avengers. There's nothing that gets you more hyped for a film than hearing that intro music.
If it wasn't there, there would definitely be something missing, and it would not... The movie wouldn't be as good without an absolute banger of a soundtrack.
Without a banger of a soundtrack, as Devin put it, there would not be as much emotion and feeling put into that movie. Now, I talked to Dr. Greg Gelcher from the History Department of Morningside College, and he even said that at the time, the people that went into the movie theater in 1977 and watched the original Star Wars, now called A New Hope, when those first two notes of that intro hit, there were people that were astonished and were already knowing that they were in for the ride of their lives with this movie. So that should probably put some perspective in on that. So to start off on the video game segment of this then, we're going to go through 3 different genres today. We're going to go through adventure games, shooter games, fighting games, and then we'll wrap it all back up into one little thing here. But starting off with adventure games, we're going to go back in time a little bit to the early 2000s with Metroid Prime. Now, Metroid Prime, I believe, released in 2002?
I think it was 2001.
Something close to that time. So the game is a little old, but the sound direction in the game is phenomenal, and it's definitely a modern type of soundtrack. You know, by the time we get to the GameCube, we were into soundtracks that are not 8-bit, 16-bit productions.
Well,
so going back a little bit further, you know, you want to look at something like Mario Brothers. You know, these early side-scrolling games, and even the soundtrack there has a point. So the soundtrack in Mario Brothers, Devin, would you say is more there to set the stage for each, or for what each individual stage is, right?
Yeah, they definitely set a mood. They fit with the background of those stages for the overworld stages that are nice, bright, and vibrant. There's the classic doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Right.
And then for the underground stages, there's a much deeper, more ominous tune to go with it.
Right, so with these changing audio, you know, so even with Mario Brothers, which is one of the first major successful video games, there's a soundtrack to it. And, you know, even going back to Pac-Man on the arcade, there's a soundtrack to it. Now, the Pac-Man soundtrack doesn't change per level. It changes a little bit in tempo based on time, I believe, in the game, but Mario Brothers does that as well. So with the tempo changing in the song, it's meant to drive more haste, whereas each individual song in Mario Brothers is designed to set the stage for what you're going through and the area you're going through.
Yeah, it sets a nice tone, and whenever the tempo picks up, that's a cue for you to, hey, you might want to hurry up and get done.
Right. So I mentioned this along with our adventure games section here because that's the primary goal of music in adventure games, is to set the stage and to kind of show you, you know, to give each area a unique vibe to it. You know, each area has its, you know, little unique tendencies to it. Whether, so using Metroid Prime as a specific example here. When you're in Talon Overworld and it's raining on you, the music in Talon Overworld is there to portray the setting around you. It's meant to give you, you know, this feeling of, you know, being in this rainy jungle-like environment.
Yeah, it definitely amplifies the rainy jungle-type, almost swamp-like environment.
Yeah, and then when you go later to the Magmore Caverns, the music is there, and now even though the song is a little bit of a meme between Metroid fans, the song is there to portray danger and the sense of, hey, I'm in this really hot cavernous area underneath this planet.
Yeah, there's a reason why they took a track that was in Super Metroid, developed back in 1993?
94.
94. They took a track from 1994, cleaned it up and modernized it, and put it in Metroid Prime for a similar area.
Yeah, so with Metroid games, one of the fantastic things with this will actually come up again a little bit later on, they do a fantastic job of reusing songs where they need to, but putting their own little flair on them. So as you go through different Metroid games, like Super Metroid to Metroid Prime, you see these changing, these songs that are familiar but different to suit the own area and the own, the gameplay on its own little way. So I would go as far as to say with adventure games, the soundtrack is as much or as important to the game and to the sound design in general as the level design is. I can't play through Metroid Prime 2 and not... I couldn't imagine playing through Metroid Prime 2 and turning off the music when I'm in Dark Aether. Because even though the Dark Aether music is based entirely on ambiance, it's there to portray this feeling of you are in a hostile environment where everything is deadly, the air is even damaging you, and it's a corrupted version of regular Aether.
Yeah, even with the Dark Aether music, you can still hear the same audio cues from the
regular
Light
Aether
World music.
Yeah, from the regular Aether music, but it's just
very much polluted with the Dark Aether.
With the Dark Aether vibe.
Yeah.
See, that's the biggest thing we're looking for here is vibe. We're not looking for specific definition. We're looking for the vibe of what we are, for the vibe of the area we're in.
Vibe check.
Vibe check. So with that in mind, we see the same thing in films. One of the best films to do this was Inception, with Hans Zimmer being in charge of the sound direction for Inception. So Inception's music is often used in memes because it's dramatic. It's a real dramatic soundtrack. And with that in mind, it really drives the plot of the movie forward. The music is as important to the plot as the level design itself is. Because without the music, the level design isn't going to sound as good in a video game. In a film, that scene is not going to be as important without the music to give you that general vibe.
Absolutely.
And Inception and Hans Zimmer in general does that fantastically. That's why Hans Zimmer will come up a little bit later again.
Yeah, he's definitely a familiar name. Him and John Williams are both known for having excellent soundtracks in the movies that they work on.
And John Williams is the composer for Star Wars, correct?
And Indiana Jones and Jurassic Park.
So John Williams, very, very well-traveled, very well-versed individual in John Williams.
He gets around.
He gets around. So adventure games have the same importance in their music as films do. Take the music out of Star Wars, and you're left with a husk of a movie.
Oh, absolutely.
You've taken a bunch of the life out of the movie. And adventure games are games. They've I wouldn't even say they've waned in popularity over the years, but they don't necessarily have the same kind of soundtracks all the time now. But we've seen this big genre morphing where we're combining a bunch of different genres into one. Like I think of Borderlands, and I think of it's a first-person shooter RPG adventure game, and it's like, wow,
yeah,
you have so much combined into this.
Fallout's the same way.
Yeah, well, and then Fallout's a really interesting example here because Fallout has its own soundtrack backing it. And that's in their own soundtrack backing it is entirely designed for the ambiance of the game.
And then they also have soundtracks from the 40s, 50s, and 60s.
They have real music positioned in. Now, that music is positioned in as radio tracks more frequently than not.
Yeah.
But those radio tracks are just as important to setting the ambiance of where you are. Because you can turn the radio on your little Pip-Boy in your heads-up display, but at the same time, you're going to be walking through, like in New Vegas, you're going to be walking through Freeside, through the ruins of part of Old Vegas, and you're going to hear this one radio off in the distance playing Johnny Guitar, and you just get this swell of emotions, because you're like, these people are living in a society that was ravaged by nuclear warfare 200 years down the road, and they're still listening to the same old music. They're still listening to these somber songs that, some of them are somber, some of them are not, that all are setting the stage for the game around you and for the world around them.
To continue to reflect on New Vegas, when you go to get the platinum chip, I believe it's Ain't That a Kick in the Head plays as soon as you exit the casino.
Right, and there's several, there's New Vegas specific, there's several quests that have their names based entirely on the music of the game. So there's quests like "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?"
I cast a spell on you.
There's a lot of quests in the game that have their names based on that. So I think this actually transitions us pretty well into shooter games. So if the general purpose of music is to set the vibe of a situation, then music in shooter games, specifically in the campaigns of shooter games, is to drive that situation in a specific direction through narrative technique.
Absolutely.
So with adventure games, you're usually just, the music is portraying the area. The music in shooter games in their campaigns is more designed to drive the narrative. So Halo 3 ODST is a fantastic game that is borderline adventure game. Like I said, fusion of genres.
Yeah, unlike other Halo games that are rather linear, ODST has an open world feel.
It has an open world, it's a semi-open world game that's still a linear story, but it has kind of a branch chain sort of story that you can do in whatever order you want. But when you're in the nighttime city as the rookie, which is a large portion of the game, as the game is played mostly through flashbacks. It's played as the rookie seeking out where his comrades are in this nighttime city, fighting the Covenant, this combination of alien races, and he's looking for, clues as to where his team went, because he needs to link back up with his team to finish what mission they dropped into the city to do to begin with. So this music is all somber and sad, and it drives the narrative of this lonely soldier he's not a super soldier like in typical Halo games. That's one of the biggest reasons I love ODST so much. He's basically a regular dude.
Yeah, he's no Master Chief.
He's no Master Chief. He's basically just a regular dude wandering around this city, fighting against perilous aliens that have killed millions upon millions upon millions of people just like him. And he's traveling through this city to find his team. With
nice, somber, piano-driven tracks
and saxophone. And the biggest thing, I've watched a couple of Bungie, the company that made Halo 3 ODST, called them Vidocs. They were basically short video documentaries on what went into the game. And Martin O'Donnell, the man mostly behind the soundtrack, said that saxophones aren't typically used in orchestral music.
No,
so
generally not.
With ODST, they brought the saxophone in and merged it with the typical orchestral style, because the saxophone does such a good job at portraying the emotions they were looking for in that. And I think there's certain saxophone parts from that game that I hear it and I'm immediately sent back to my childhood, and I'm immediately sent back to that game.
That's how you know it's a good track.
That's how you know it's
immediately get a shock of nostalgia and a quick little flashback to where you were when this game first came out, when you first heard this track.
Absolutely. And then to follow it up with the next game that came after ODST, Halo Reach's soundtrack is on just as even of a plane. Reach has a very odd story in that it transitions from your gameplay where you feel like this triumphant hero that's going through and is completing all these objectives, but then every time you're in between, and every time there's this cutscene in between, it's just so somber. Like, yeah, we're doing this and we're actually winning now, and then, oh no, we're not winning at all.
Just progressively
the tables
gets
have
worse.
We thought we flipped the tables, but now the tables have been flipped back upon us. Wow. And the music does such a good job of portraying that narrative direction. And that's the biggest thing with those kinds of first-person shooters. Looking at Call of Duty, specifically Modern Warfare 2, which is where Hans Zimmer comes up again, because he was in charge of the sound direction for Modern Warfare 2. He does the same thing in Modern Warfare 2 that he does in Inception, in which it drives the plot forward. This music is, it's not necessarily there to set the ambience of where you are, but it's meant to drive it. It's meant to drive you forward and into specific situations. I think of songs like Protocol from the soundtrack, which is, I believe, the final. In the final mission, you're on a boat chase to chase down this rogue general. This boat chase music, it just gives you this certain surge of inner power and inner strength towards trying to take this guy down, because you're in the right, but if he gets away, your life, the character you're playing, that character's life is basically over.
and history will see to it that they were in the wrong.
Exactly. So with something like Modern Warfare 2, which is more of a pop shooter and where the campaign is more action, is more action movie driven, you see some of the same tropes as what shows up in action movies, and all about this driving the plot forward. Let's take a look at a different kind of shooter now. Let's take a look at Doom real quick. So with Doom, the music is there to make you feel like a badass.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what the music's there to do.
Lots of guitar, lots of electric guitar, mind you, lots of heavy metal meant to make you feel powerful, made to make the combat feel as intense as it ought to be.
Absolutely.
It drives you forward to...
It drives you into... See, and the joke with Doom Guy is that Doom Guy is too angry to die. The music is meant to drive that emotion into you,
Absolutely.
make you feel what he's feeling. Like, I'm here to do this job, and I'm going to do it at any cost, and I cannot be killed.
It makes you feel that inner fury.
Exactly. And that's something that, when you remake a game, sometimes that kind of thing is lost. But you look at the old Doom, and even though the old Doom is like in the 8-bit, 16-bit...
16-bit.
Is in the 16-bit genre where the music is, definitely older sounding because it sounds 16-bit. That music still drives, even if it's a more primitive drive, it still drives that emotion of rage and fury towards who you're fighting.
Yeah, even with the 16-bit music, you can still see what they were trying to emulate with guitar and percussion and all that stuff. You can tell that that's what they meant to put in the track.
And it took a lot of inspiration from modern heavy metal, the modern heavy metal movements. There's a lot of calls to Metallica and to other heavy metal bands of the time. And nowadays, you see this, with New Doom, you see this genre fusion of EDM and metal in a way that I don't think I'd ever heard before Doom. Whenever I hear EDM, I don't hear what I hear with Doom. With Doom, they managed to take this genre that's typically used for dance music and put it straight into being heavy.
Oh, definitely. They take all the electronic type sounding stuff with EDM music. You even see some of that in Metroid Prime as well. But with Doom, it takes that and kicks it up to not 11, more like to 20, with additional heavy metal type stuff. Electric guitars, impressive percussion, all wonderfully fused with electronica.
Oh yeah, it's so well done. It's such a well done soundtrack. So in shooter games, we have a little bit of the fusion of what comes up in this next category, but in the next category, the music is there for an entirely different reason, and that's fighting games. So when we look at fighting games, the main purpose of music in fighting games is to not only set the stage of battle and to give you something to pump you up and get going, which is where it connects back with shooter games, but if it's a character-specific song, it's meant to give you more personality development on that character.
Absolutely. That also reconnects with adventure games, because with Metroid, there's key characters that come up, be it Samus herself or Ridley, her recurring antagonist. They each have their own themes or remixes, depending on the game, that come up and add additional personality to that character.
Absolutely. In addition to, pushing that battle forward and giving you some energy going into specific situations. But with fighting games, it's really focused on that character and on the fighting itself. They're really designed to get you up and going. And when there's stage-specific music, it's still there to set the ambiance of the stage.
Yeah.
Ultra Street Fighter 4 has a stage that is set on an erupting volcano. I don't remember the name of the stage, but it has one of the best songs in that entire soundtrack. But it's there to push the sense of urgency about where you're fighting. Now, where it doesn't matter, it's not going to change and stop you from continuing to fight on that stage.
There's no stage hazards.
There's no stage hazards, but it's there, and it's meant to, it's meant to portray the sense of danger.
Yeah, that's a mood.
And the sense of severity of the situation, if you want to look at it from a story perspective. Looking at Marvel vs. Capcom, which is a popular fighting game that has been a little bit neglected lately, there's this really interesting fusion of adventure game characters and movie characters all coming together in a fighting game, along with a couple of traditional fighting game characters. So all of these characters have their own unique themes, in addition to each stage having its own theme. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be hearing the character themes.
Yeah.
And these character themes are all designed to take little nuances from where from where these characters come from the games they come from, and put them into the game. In most cases, these are actually just remixes of, like, if this character has a specific theme in their game, these are going to be remixes of their theme.
Yeah, like with Zero, for example, he gets his theme based from his appearance in Mega Man X2, which was made back in the 90s. They've taken it, remixed it, and now it's amazing.
Exactly. With Albert Wesker, this is a bit more of a contemporary one. Mm-hmm. Wesker has his own theme. He's the main antagonist of Resident Evil 5. He has his own theme in Resident Evil 5 that plays when you fight him the several times you fight him. And they remixed that theme and put it into the game. And, it's meant to not only portray the character, but also the severity of the situation when you're fighting with them. With the Marvel characters, it's a little bit harder to do that, because not all Marvel characters are going to have specific themes that are dedicated to them. But Capcom has done a fantastic job of taking these Marvel characters and making themes for them that fit them to a T. All right, here's an example. So Captain America. Captain America's theme in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, in my opinion, is more of a theme for the entire game than it is for just Captain America, because it portrays Captain America so well. And it's a banger of a song, which is why I agree with that. And there's also specific YouTubers that have used it for, like, their Marvel specific content, which really makes me associate it with that.
Nice.
But this Captain America theme, just the way that it plays, it feels like Captain America. It feels heroic, and it feels like Captain America. I don't know how else to describe it in that
triumphant, maybe a little bit of like a old-timey military feel.
Not even necessarily the old-timey military feel, but definitely like triumphant and heroic. You look at other characters from Marvel that are in there, like Doctor Doom's theme is a little scientific sounding. It's a little more robotic, because Doom is more of a robot-looking character. It's just amazing that the amount of effort they went into on each of these themes to kind of put the personality of these characters into those themes. Whereas, so like with a normal fighting game, you're creating the personality for that character, and the theme is meant to enhance that personality. With Marvel vs. Capcom, you're taking a character that's already established, and you're enhancing the personality of them through the theme, because you're directly injecting the personality of the character into the music. Like with Captain America, or with Wolverine. So moving away from Marvel vs. Capcom and Street Fighter, we have another kind of fighting game that does their music in a different way, in the sense that the main draw of these two games is to get you pumped up and ready to go right off the bat. We're talking about Mortal Kombat and these two title themes are two of the most iconic title themes in video game history as far as I'm concerned. Now, the Mortal Kombat theme is based from the movie and not from the games, but it still has so much notoriety around the fighting game community and around the general public that as soon as you hear it, it's immediately associated with Mortal Kombat.
Absolutely.
Regardless of the fact that it came from the movie instead.
It's that iconic.
It's that iconic. With Killer Instinct, which may be a little bit more obscure to the general population, it was a similar game to Mortal Kombat, but it didn't push the limits as much as Mortal Kombat. The modern Killer Instinct's theme just immediately puts you in this state of mind that is like, I'm ready to kick someone's ass. I'm ready to go. We're gonna, Killer Instinct is based on having these really long auto combos that you can just rattle off if you have some basic knowledge of the game. And it's meant to have this it's meant to build this really big hype train. And that opening theme just sets the stage for the game so well. With looking at a different game, this is actually going to go more in the direction of a Japanese style. So we're coming back kind of full circle here, because we started off with a Japanese style game in Metroid Prime, even though that's more Americanized. We're coming back to what are generally considered in the fighting game community to be anime fighters or air dash fighters, because they contain air dashes or double jumps or something like that.
Okay.
So we're talking about BlazBlue and Guilty Gear, which I linked them together here because their main composer, Daisuke Ishiwatari, is the same.
Fast.
Exactly, Daisuke Ishiwatari. he is the composer for both of those soundtracks. Now with BlazBlue, it's obviously going to have, most of the music's going to have a little bit more of an anime style to it. And I'm not personally a big fan of anime, but one of the big things that draws me to this music in most cases is that Mr. Ishiwatari has a fantastic grasp of blending musical genres. And he does such a good job of it that I'm honestly astonished that he hasn't moved on to other projects outside of BlazBlue and Guilty Gear. Except for the fact that he is actually a very long tenured member of Arc System Works, who owns those two franchises. So
see.
I think he has like direct ties into the upper management of the company, and that's why. With Ishiwatari, his music is so varied in these games that it's just perfect to set the stage for all of these characters. There's common themes between all of these, there's commonality between all of the themes, but they all have their own unique feel to them to make that character feel unique. The theme of Ragna is going to be entirely different from the theme of Hakumen because they're two completely different characters. Ragna is an outlaw who's, on the run from the government and is possibly one of the most powerful characters in the entire universe in that regard because of different things that happen through the story. His theme is there to fit this freelance outlaw, I'm going to do what I want kind of character. Whereas Hakumen's character is more based on, honor and combat. So his theme and more like of a traditional Japanese style. So more like the way of the samurai kind of thing. Hakumen's theme is a little bit more traditionally Japanese sounding than Ragna's is. Ragna's heavily uses guitars, whereas Hakumen's uses more of the traditional Japanese stuff. And there's all these different fusions of musical genres and musical disciplines throughout the soundtrack to give each character their own unique feel. There's a lot of metal influence in there as well, which especially comes forward in Guilty Gear. And some of Guilty Gear's soundtracks are, I'm not the biggest fan of Guilty Gear's soundtrack, but when I'm playing the game, you don't notice it as much because it's there to serve a purpose. A lot of these songs we can go and we can listen to on our own, especially with Metroid Prime. We can go and listen to these songs on our own in our own free time, but some of these songs, they're not on that level, and they don't have to be. Sometimes they should be, sometimes they don't have to be.
Yeah.
And I feel that way mostly with Guilty Gear. They aren't songs that I'm going to go listen to in my free time.
They're not necessarily environmental or background tracks.
Yeah, they're more like actually specific to the situation of playing the game, which is a perfectly fine thing for video games because that's what they're meant to be.
It's meant to enhance the experience.
And that's how we're going to tie this all back together here and wrap everything back up. Just like in a movie, the music is there to set the experience. It's there to set the tone, drive the narrative, and kind of introduce you to the characters or the areas that you're in, and give you a little bit more personality to the game. Without these soundtracks, it would be very hard sometimes to get as attached to a character as you are. If we're going to take a shooter example that I didn't mention earlier, Mass Effect has character-specific themes. And now Mass Effect is a game where you're traveling the universe. You're traveling through the universe and you're meeting all these alien species and you're meeting these different alien people and you recruit some of them onto your team. Well, with Mass Effect, each character has their own theme that plays on their own little mission that you play with them. And it's meant to give that character more personality. I think without these character-specific themes in some games, you just wouldn't have as much of a feel for that character. Yeah, you wouldn't have as much personality behind it.
They definitely wouldn't be as memorable.
They wouldn't shine as much.
No.
So, in conclusion, the video game music is, a lot of the times people are fine with leaving it in the game and fine with just listening to it as the game gets played. But some of these songs are truly transcendent and truly worthy of the praise that, I've kind of heaped on them through here, which is the reason why I listen to so many video game songs on my own. I did my Spotify Rewind today, and one of my big categories in the genre section was video game soundtracks. They make that specific denotation. So, I don't know. If you've ever wanted to listen to video game music, I wouldn't be so ashamed of it or so private about it, because these songs drive as much emotional engagement as a regular song, if not more. I had a conversation with somebody a long time ago where we were just like, hey, I really like video game music, and you really like video game music, and we both like it because, it drives more emotion than modern music does sometimes. Modern pop music's really stale, really repetitive, and really, really fake. It's really fake. That's the biggest issue with a lot of it. It's really fake.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you. You can turn on modern radio, modern top 40 radio, and you can hear a lot of the same stuff, just with different vocals.
A lot of the same stuff over and over again. Now, I'm not going to say that metal doesn't do the same thing sometimes. I'm not going to say that there's not a certain primitive drive to rock and roll music that gets, featured in a lot of rock and roll music. I'm not going to say there's not.
The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
But at least, with video game music, you can feel how real it is when it's done well. When it's done well, it feels like its own unique thing, and there's no shame in listening to that as far as I'm concerned.
No, not at all.
Anything important you want to add here at the end, Devin?
Kind of surprised you started with Metroid Prime and not any of the earlier Metroid games. Like, the original Metroid itself, released way back in the 80s, was renowned for a soundtrack that wasn't vibrant or poppy, that wasn't like the Legend of Zelda or Super Mario Bros. Soundtracks that came before it. It was meant to portray a similar feel to the Alien movies.
Yeah, we can actually talk about that real quick. So, the whole basis of Metroid has drawn a lot of inspiration from the Alien franchise of movies, and that's shown through even the similarity of character names, like Ridley, who is one of the main antagonists of Metroid throughout time. That's really close to Ripley, and Ridley's appearance looks pretty close to the Xenomorph.
Not to mention that the director of the Alien movies was named Ridley Scott.
That also helps. So Metroid, throughout history, and not just with the Prime games, has done a really good job of casting the ambience of this foreign alien planet and this future where there's a bunch of uncertainty, at least for your character as a bounty hunter. So Metroid Prime is just really a continuation of that, but the original Metroid, and especially Super Metroid, really hit on all cylinders for that. And I bring up Super Metroid specifically because I would classify that as the first modern Metroid game, considering it's not 8-bit on the Nintendo Entertainment System.
And it's also not
black and white on the Game Boy.
No, and it's not very hard to get access to it either.
Yeah, it's not hard to access it, and two, it's not hard to play the game at a competent level. It takes a significant difficulty stride backwards because it adds a couple of features that are just, you would say quality of life, but they all kind of add up into making the game a little bit easier. So, I starting with Metroid Prime was just because, it fit the more of the adventure game topic, but you're completely right, and I completely agree with you that the original games are just as good at portraying the same kind of alien, isolated vibe that the Prime games do. The Prime games just do it in a different way that is a little bit more appealing to the general public because they're more modern games, and they sound like real music instead of sounding pixely like what the games look like.
Well, yeah. It's understandable that the earlier games are going to show their age, but
even still, those songs are bangers, and I don't care what anybody says.
There's a reason that today's composers still draw upon that whenever they are making music for newer games.
Exactly. There's a song in Super Metroid that's called Red Brinstar, because the area you're in is an area of Brinstar that is red. It really creative with their naming scheme. And they've reused this Red Brinstar theme 2 times at least since then, 2 times that I can think of right off the top of my head, in modern composition bases. So one of them is in Metroid Prime 2. It's called Torvusbog Subterranean, and it's meant to portray like a threatening underwater vibe. This threatening alien planet, this isolated field, but now you're underwater and you're having to deal with it underwater. And then the other one is the
Samus Returns. It's in a water cave type area.
Right, and it's called Water Caves or Lower Brinstar, depending on which version of the song you get. But in Samus Returns, which is a remake of the second Metroid, it really is there to push the Water Caves vibe, and it's more of a bright and vibrant song than Torvusbog Subterranean, because you're not directly underwater the entire time, you're just in a water cave.
Yeah, and the area itself is more bright and vibrant than a lot of other areas in that game particularly.
Yeah, we could probably do a podcast entirely based on Metroid music and how different revisions, and we might, and how different revisions of Metroid songs sound different and are, take the same basic theme but revise it to fit each thing. It's a really deep thing. I went to go do post rolls here and we got into a completely different subject. So with that aside, is there anything else, Devin Payne?
No, there isn't. I think we hit the nail pretty hard on the head here.
Well, with no post rolls then, that is Fun Police Podcast, Episode 4.